Logging your experience for your internship can be a struggle while trying to maintain a full-time job when you just finished with architecture school. Keeping track of those hours just feels like another full-time job. It can also be very overwhelming since it's something you know nothing about and no one really shows you how to do it or what to avoid. I've been through this process myself and I made a lot of mistakes during that process. And in this video, I want to talk to you about how you can do that process so much faster and more effective. So what is a CRB? CERB stands for the Canadian Experience Record Book, and that is part of your internship program. And so a part of that program is you need to collect your architectural experience, and you need to have a minimum of 3,720 hours. But those hours need to be in specific categories. So you need to make sure as an intern, you gain experience on all the phases of a project. And so you need to have that experience in all of these categories. And let me walk you through those categories. So category A. So for category A, it's all about design and construction, documentation. And so within this category, you need a total of 2,200 hours in this category alone. And so within this category, you have many other things. Let me just fix my trace paper here and just put that there. So within category A, you need 2,200 hours. You need to have hours within programming of a project. You need to have site and environmental analysis, and you need to have schematic design. You also need engineering, systems, and coordination. So that's basically coordinating drawings with the engineers and all of that fun stuff. You need building cost analysis. You need code research. You need envelope detailing. And I should also mention that this is the latest updates to the internship. So they added a few more, they kind of they reshuffled all of the hours and they added some specific categories. And one of them was the envelope detailing and also the environmental analysis. That was something that they also added. And so after envelope detailing, we also need to have design development. We also need to have construction documents. We also need specs, specifications, and material research. We also need to have document checking and coordination. Now there might be a bit of an overlap between some of these. So document checking and document checking and engineering systems coordination. There's a bit of an overlap because you're coordinating, but you're also checking drawings. So there might be also a bit of an overlap there. And then after this, we also have energy literacy and sustainability. So within category A, you have about 12 subcategories of hours that you need. And for each one, you need to have specific hours within each one. And they total up to 2,200 hours for this category. Then we also have category B. Now, for category B, this is all about construction administration. So for this one, you need a total of, within this category, you need a total of 250 hours within this category. So within this specific category, you need to have procurement and contract award. And I just realized I'm writing in red, so I'm sorry about that. I should have picked a different color. And you also need construction phase office. And then 3, you need construction phase site. So that is within category B. So within, of course, I don't have the fine-grained breakdown, but within each one you need specific hours, but the total adds up to 520. And then your last category, because there's 3 categories, is category C. So for category C, this includes management. So it's everything that pertains to management. And you need within this category 240 hours. So it's the least of all the categories here. And so within this, you need management of the project, and you're going to need specific amount of hours within this. Oh, oops, sorry, project, not program. And then you need business / practice management. So that's basically the 3 categories that pertains to the internship program. And so you have to make sure that you meet the specific hours for each of the categories and for each of the subcategories as well. And so there's one more thing. Now, we are still short from the 3,720 hours because between categories A, B, and C, you need an additional 760 hours from anywhere between A, B, and C. And so that equals out to the 3,720 hours in total. And that is what you need for the entire internship program. And I should also note that no one ever finishes the internship program just with the minimum amount of hours. And I should say no one. There might be someone out there, but it's very rare that you actually meet this number dead on. Every intern that I've known typically doubles this number or triples it, whatever it might be, but they always kind of go over the minimum amount. And the reason for that is just because getting your hours in these specific categories can be a bit challenging because a project is not such a linear process either. And you might be working on multiple projects at a time, and they could be at various different scales, which then determines the amount of how long each phase is. So that's a whole other thing, but that's basically a breakdown of the internship program. Resources that you really need and you should look into, and just take a few minutes to look into them. I definitely would recommend the Internship in Architecture Program Manual. The manual is really helpful. Let me just share what you should be looking into exactly in that manual. The internship manual here, and this is the latest that's on your jurisdiction website. So for example, I'm in Ontario. This is from the OEA, and I got it from the OEA website. I'll include a link down below. Now, what I would pay close attention, I would go through all of it. They do go through kind of the whole process of the internship, annual fees and charges. They also talk about how you could also log your hours as a recognized student. So if you are now as a student, you're actually able to log some of the hours that you do in the summer. It used to be that you couldn't do that. You can only start logging your hours after you graduate. So now you're actually able to log some of those hours, and you could also just go through this into depth. They talk about submission for review, late submissions, which I will also share some thoughts on that. And so you would have a lot of the detailed information here. Now, what I would pay close attention to is the appendix. So you want to dive into the appendix. So here we have Appendix A, which really breaks down individually each subcategory of hours you need for each one. Like for programming, you need 80 hours, site analysis, you need another 80, and so on. And we went through the subtotals for each of the categories. earlier. And so this is where this becomes really helpful, is that it actually starts to outline what each category should include. So programming is a process of understanding and setting forth and writing the client's requirements for a given project. Steps in this process include establishing goals, considering a budget, collecting, organizing, and analyzing data, identifying and developing concepts, and determining needs. Client-architect agreements presume that the client will furnish the program. So it really dives into the definition of program, what should be included within that project phase. And what I found really helpful when I was logging in my hours is they also have typical required intern activities, which include the following: participating in conferences with clients regarding programming, periodic reviews and formal presentations, and assist in preparing minutes or reports for future reference, assist with presentations at zoning and variance hearings, and at meetings with the clients and consultants of these projects, assist in preparing the summary and evaluation of data and requirements obtained from all sources, research current literature pertaining to architectural programming. So it really dives into the type of activities that's kind of expected, or you could expect as an intern architect. So that helps you to then fill out the portion of the role as an intern. And so you would really provide a detailed description. And so I would really recommend just to go through each one. And you have site and environmental analysis. They talk a little bit about what the phase is all about. And it's great that they do this, because as an intern, you're new to the whole process. You're new really to the practice of architecture. And so this gives you a little bit of help. And so I found that reading this document really helped me through that process. And so just going through the activities may include the following, and typically they include even more, right? So, well, definitely more than just what they listed. But then you see more for each one. And you want to make sure these are kind of listed very broadly, so you would go into a lot more detail. But it just gives you a bit of a framework to work from. Now, because each jurisdiction has even more specific requirements for interns, you need to make sure that you look into the specific appendix. So for Ontario, because I'm in Ontario, we are with the OEA. So with the OEA, there's an Appendix B that has very specific Ontario guidelines. And you want to make sure you read this and you go through it, because within the summary of experience and within the experience required for the internship, there's also a specific amount of experience that you need to make sure that you have experience of Ontario projects. So when you're doing all of these projects, if they're all international projects, you might get in trouble, because you need also hours that are specific to Ontario buildings and Ontario projects. I would definitely go through the Appendix B, because there's some really good information here. They dive into mentor supervising architects, and they should also dive into the experience eligibility, and they go into all of the specifics that you need. And the specifics that relate to your jurisdiction. So for example, this is Ontario. And they also go through the fees and so on. So definitely go through this document, really dive into it, because there's really good information here. Now, the other document that I would recommend to get to know a little bit is on the Ontario Association of Architects. There's also the occupancy types. Now, if you're unsure what each occupancy type includes in terms of the project types, I would dive into this. So for assembly, it includes art galleries, bowling arenas, childcare facilities, and so on. So they really dive and define for what assembly includes. And commercial, so when you are trying to put your occupancy type, you can really see, is it really commercial? Well, commercial includes all of these things: assembly, commercial, industrial, institutional, and residential. So it gives you a breakdown of what each of the occupancies includes. So that is going to help you to fill out your form where it has a project, where you have the summary of the projects, and you're going to have to define your occupancy type. So this document is very helpful. So these are the 3 resources that I would really get to know and really dive in and spend some time with. Here we have the Canadian Experience Record Book form, and this is how the form starts off. By the way, I apologize for the bad printing, because my printer just ran out of ink and did not print the first page well, but it did print the other pages well. So that is great. You have the option to actually do the application online, and your mentor and supervising architects would then also provide their comments online. But since I don't really have access to that because I'm no longer an intern, I will be going through the form, which is very much similar. It's the same amount of information that you would be putting into your digital format as well. So the first page is typically your intern identification. So you're just gonna provide your personal information here. So your address, some employer information, the name of the practice, the address, and you're also gonna mention who is your mentor, and you'll also put the name of your supervising architect as well. And then, although you can't see this right here, but this is just basically stating when the period of assessment that you're doing. So you're submitting from June all the way to December, you would include that. And again, remember, and they make note of it here, you need to submit every 900 to 1,000 hours, and this is important. And so the second page is where you start to get into the role of the intern. And so in this page, you need to identify the specific activities for each project on this page. So it's a bit of a summary, what you've done during that time of the project for those particular hours. So if you logged 10 hours in design development, you're going to really talk about what exactly were your tasks in design development and what you did on a daily in that project. So this is where you would start to log that information. Now, I'm just going to put this side by side because the second page here is a summary of all your projects that you're working on. So most likely you're not working just on one project, you're working on multiple projects at a time. And it's just the nature of the industry because a lot of these projects do take years to get built if you are working on larger scale projects. And so you're going to be probably balancing a few projects at a time. And so here, number one, you would list your first project. You would also include the location, the project type, the occupancy, gross floor area, the GFA, the budget, and the number of stories. Now, if there's information that you don't know, for example, the budget, you would ask your supervising architect for that information. And you should know the GFA because you're working on the project. So you would go to the stats sheet, for example, or you can ask, again, your supervising architect. And so then the project type, you would just say, is it new construction? Is it renovation? What exactly is a project type? And then you would also indicate the location. So once you fill out that part, then you would make sure that project one will correspond to the activities that you list here. And I'm going to go into that into detail how to fill this out. And so the number of stories and along with the budget. So the next page you have where you begin to provide the summary of your experience and you begin to log that experience. So again, each project, each column represents one project. So project one, let's say it's in Toronto. So project one from Toronto, we would list all the experience here. And again, maybe that experience of that Toronto project only includes site visits and contract award, and it might include some construction documents, and that's okay. So whatever it includes, whatever your activities were involved, you would just include that. And then project two, you would list out your activities on that. It might only include management of the project activities, and so on. And then along the side, you're gonna have all the numbers that add to the total here. So the sheet is actually an active cell sheet and actually adds everything up for you. And then it's gonna add all the experience within the subtotal of each of the projects and the total for each of the project, and then the total for each of the categories that you've declared. And then of course, as an intern, you're gonna have to sign the sheet. And then the last page of the CRB is the comments from your employer, who is your supervising architect, and your mentor as well. Sorry, I should mention that your mentor, all they really do is just sign the bottom of the sheet, but your supervising architect is actually gonna have to fill out these cells and indicate and provide comments. So they're gonna have to comment on the level of responsibility and involvement requested of the intern and relative level taken and performed by the intern. They're also going to provide comments on your overall attitude, philosophy, professional goals of you as an intern, as they perceive you. and then recommendations for you for the next 6 months. So typically 9 to 1,000 hours equals out to about 6 months. And then 4, they're going to comment on the extent of which intern has been exposed to the activities as outlined for each of the categories in which experience has been obtained. And so they're going to provide that, and then their supervising architect is also going to sign and date the document. And then as a mentor, they're going to declare that they've met with the intern, part of the internship program. And as an intern, you can talk to your mentor about any of the challenges you're having, questions that you might have about the program, and they're going to help you through that. So the mentor will just read through everything. They will also look at your hours typically and just see how you're doing and how you're progressing as well. And so they would sign the document and date it as well. So that's basically the form in a nutshell. Now let's dive into how to log your hours. And so now we are familiar with the general terms. We went through some of the resources that you should look into and spend some time with. We also went through what the form is all about and just going through the structure. Well, now let's dive into actually kind of getting started in logging your hours. So typically, what I like to do is I like to log my hours on an Excel sheet first. And so I would keep track of my hours there, and I would also have a notebook where I keep track of all of the activities for each project. So if I'm working on a residential project in Toronto, I'm going to have a logbook of per day where I'm logging all of my activities that I'm doing, and then I'm going to have an Excel sheet that accompanies that, which would have all of my hours as well. Now, that's what I do. You can do it all in your journal or your sketchbook and just keep track of your hours there and all of the activities as well. Now, why is it important to keep track of your activities as well? Because again, don't forget that you need to explain and provide what your role is as an intern in that project. So I typically like to start with first the summary of the project. So for example, let's just make up a project right now. We have project 1, which is you would put the name of the project, which typically I would just use the address of the project. So let's just say 100 Yonge Street. Now I'm making this up. This really, I don't even know if this is an address or not. And then I would put Toronto, and then here I would say project type. Again, remember, project type, is it new construction? Is it an addition, or is it a reno? Sometimes it's more than one. So this, let's say this is new construction, and it's also a renovation. So you would include that. And then for the occupancy, maybe it's more than one occupancy. Maybe it's mixed use. You would outline that. So for now, I'm just going to say it's residential and GFA. So you would go look at your project specs. So if you don't know what the GFA is and you weren't involved in calculating it or going through the whole studies of massing and areas, then you can just ask your supervising architect. Let's just say it's 1 million square feet for now. And then the project budget, you can say 100 mil or something. Making this up, by the way. And then for the number of stories, you would just outline the number of stories. And so then you would do the same for each project. So let's say project 1, project 2 is maybe an international project. It's in the US. So it's in the US, and you would just make up a name. So I'm just going to say this is like called master plan. I can't come up with something. And then you would fill in those specifications in here. And so then now when you're talking about your role of an intern, you would make sure that you correspond with that specific project. So what I typically like to do as well is I like to leave the part of where I'm identifying the activities as last. So let's now jump into logging your hours. So let's say for project 1, which is our Toronto 100 Yonge project, you are currently working on the early stages of the project. So you're working on the design, you're working on the massing, schematic design. So let's say for programming, you spent around 10 hours just trying to work out the programming and plans. And then because this is the early stages, you're probably working on a little bit of schematic design as well. So let's say you have 20 hours there, and you're also working on, at the same time, you're exploring the site as well because it is part of the early stages, and you spend another 20 hours there. Automatically, these will get updated, by the way, because these are active cells. And these will get updated as well because they will add everything. And so for our second master plan project, we are doing, let's say it's a different phase of the project, which is very typical, is that you're working on different projects at different phases sometimes. Sometimes they're the same phase or sometimes not. But let's say for project 2, the master plan, you're actually working more on the later end of the project phase, and you're probably focusing maybe on construction documents. So let's say that you're spending around 20 hours there, and you're also doing some coordination items, and you're checking things and coordinating as well. So you're spending another 10 hours there. And perhaps you're also helping out with some project management and admin tasks, filing, archiving project information, and so on. So maybe you spend 5 hours there. So you would just log those into those specific categories. Now that you've logged in your hours and your experience, you can begin to go back to your role as an intern. So project 1, which is the 100 Young project, you're going to list here 1. What I usually like to do is I like to say the project name, so 100 Young. And then what I like to do as well is I like to go by a description for each of the categories. So I'll go 1.1, which is project 1, category 1, which is programming, and then I will outline specifically what activities I did for that specific category and phase of the project. And then I'm going to go into describing my activities for site and environmental studies, so that's 1.2. So 1.2, and sometimes what I like to do is even write site and environmental analysis. But you don't necessarily have to. I just find it's a lot cleaner and easier to read because if you're not familiar with the exact order, that could help you in that process. And so here you can say programming as well. And then you would outline your exact activities. And so then you're going to also describe your schematic design. So that's 1.3. And so you would just list here 1.3 schematic design. And then you would describe your involvement for each one. And so then, now that we've completed the description for our first project, we can now jump to our second project, which is the master plan project. And so I usually like to just list it. And I used to, in my early stages of doing the internship program, is I used to even provide a little description of what the project was. It's not really necessary, but I used to do that. Is I would just provide a little description of, we're working on an SBA submission or a building permit and so on. And so for this project, we know that we have hours logged in for construction documents. So we're going to talk about our construction documents, activities that we did for that. So you can even write construction docs. It's not necessary, but I find it's a lot cleaner. Oh, sorry, misspelled there. Construction documents, and then you would list your activities, and then we logged hours for 2.11, which is document checking and so on. So we would do document checking and so on, and then we would describe our activities for that. And so we would continue then with our next category, right? So we also did hours for management of the project, so that would be 2.16. And so we would talk about our activities for management of the project. And so we would list, or I should say, write in a sentence and so on, your activities of your involvement for the management of project. And so basically that is how you would fill out your logbook. So typically I like to start with filling out the project information, then I'll go and fill out my hours, and then I would go and lastly fill out the activities I specifically did for each one. Typically, you can't get it all in one sheet. You might be able to, depending on how many projects you're working on. You can just submit an additional copy and just continue writing your experience and so on. And so then once you're done all of this, you can then go to your supervising architect and they will fill out and provide comments for each of these categories, and then they will sign as well and date the document, and your mentor will as well and date the document. That's basically the process and how you would go about filling out these forms. So now I'm going to actually share with you my CRB log, and these are quite old actually. I didn't realize how old they are, but they do have some age to them. So this is my log that I did way back when, and this is the part where I did all of the description. Now this is probably not my best example because I feel like this is a little bit of a lazy one. So let me show you a neater example. Okay, yeah, this one's better. So as you can see here, I actually logged in. So I have project 1 and then I have project 2. So you can see here my project 1 and project 2, and I log those hours, and I have the subtotals here and then totals here for each of the categories. This is back to 2016, right? Wow, it's been a while. I still remember logging this, so it's funny how it's been that long ago. And so here I usually just write the project name, which I've concealed in this document. And then I would go and talk about the building cost analysis. And I said, for example, in this situation, I calculated areas and volumes of the project to determine the material costs, material quantity, and construction costs as well. And then I was also involved in design development. So I assisted with the development of room finish schedules, door schedules for materials, finishes, fixed equipment, and fixtures. And I provided detailed drawings from schematic design documents, and this included plans, elevations, and sections. And then for the specifications and material research, I assisted with the selection of materials through material research. This included comparing various materials with the following factors in consideration. So I actually talk about that I was comparing some of the materials together, and I was looking at different factors. So I was comparing the manufacturer's reliability, the code suitability of that material with what the program was, and the aesthetic, performance, and maintenance and cost, like the material cost, and looking into the installation, labor, and all of those items, and to see if that really suited the client needs and did it suit the project. So I remember going through a lot of material selection and just trying to find the right materials, and then putting together options for the client. And so the next project, I was involved in different stages. And you can see that I did more than one page of just project explanations, but you can see that I was involved in different stages of the project, and some of them I was involved like more in a linear process where I did kind of do a few hours of design, but it was more heavily on the later stages because when I got involved in the project, it was more in the construction and design development stages, but there were some design elements that had to be kind of looked at as well. And so this also depends because this project was a lot smaller, so I was able to do hours in more of the categories, but then you have other categories where I was involved more on the later stages, and so it kind of varies. And this log is actually a later log, it's not one of my first ones. So it has less of the earlier design stuff, but perhaps you're still working on the same projects for your whole internship, which there were projects that I was working on for multiple submissions. And so you would show that kind of progress. You would see that progress, I should say. And so you can see here that this project, I was more involved in the construction documents and I was looking at materials and so on. So you would have all that identified there, and then you would just kind of explain your tasks. So project tasks for my project 4, I was doing engineering system coordination, and I assisted with the coordination of engineering systems, and that included mechanical, electrical, and structural, and I provided that were provided by consultants, and then I made sure that those documents kind of were coordinated with the design documents, and this included, conference calls, communicating through emails, and so on. And then I did some building cost analysis, design development. I provided detailed drawings from the schematic design drawings, and I kind of detailed those and provided, and this included plans, elevations, and sections. and so on. And then you have this project where I was on the early stages of the program, and I determined the allowable land coverage. So I looked at density. I was looking at the maximum allowable areas according to some of the zoning bylaws, and I assisted the architect with documentation and research of zoning regulations and codes. So the very really early stages of a project. And then I also did some site analysis. I researched and analyzed the site access, the site easements, existing site utilities, road widening, existing site services, etc. So I was really examining where should the entrances go. So just really doing a site analysis. And then for schematic design, I prepared preliminary design concepts through 3D massing, spatial programming, 2D drawings, and I assisted with the development and coordination of documents. So in this case, we were working on a site plan approval package, SPA, and it provided assistance with various design scenarios. We're putting different design options together to obtain relief of variances from particular zoning requirements. So that really, and so I also described that I participated in meetings with clients, establishing the program and building design. Presentations were both formally and informal, and I participated in design reviews with the city. And so then I go on to engineering system coordination, building cost analysis, calculating areas, code research, and then as well with the guidance, of course, of the supervising architect. And then I also worked on design development, construction documents, document checking, project management as well, and so on. So that gives you an idea of how to log your experience. And so for this logbook, I think this one, what's this one? This one is actually an earlier one. It's 2015. So for this one, I didn't really do those subcategories. I just listed all of my activities. So if I were reviewing it, I think having something a little more structured where I actually, put point by point, like 6.1, and it corresponds to your log summary here. So, project 1.1, 2.2 for schematic. I find that it's a lot cleaner and it's probably easier for your reviewer as well. So my first log, I didn't do that. I just list everything, and there's nothing wrong with it. No one said anything, but you want to make their life easier, right? And it's a lot easier even for you to log as well. It's just easier, I find. And so here I just listed everything. I researched and analyzed site restrictions. I participated in design reviews and approval meetings with the client. I determined the project allowable land coverage, density. I helped with researching, analyzing site access, and so on. This project I worked on and participated in a request for proposals, an RFP, and design presentations. So preparing marketing drawings and so on. And so basically you would outline that. Now, I should mention that if you are working on a confidential project and you signed an NDA or it's very sensitive, you can actually mention that it's a confidential project. You don't have to say the address. You can mention that it's confidential, and that's fine. I've had to do that as well on several projects. You would have here your log hours, and so you would then have all your hours. So you could see this is one of my earlier projects, so a lot of the projects were still in the earlier stages in this case, and some of those carried on to my other submissions and some didn't. Some of the projects I got switched to other projects, or they were on pause, whatever might be the situation, and that's okay too. You're just logging exactly what you're doing and keeping track of your activities for each of the projects. And so of course I signed and dated the document as well. That's basically how I logged my hours, and of course I had a bit of a spreadsheet, an Excel sheet on the side where I would keep track of my hours, and then I have a notebook where I kept track of the activities that I was involved, and I made sure to submit every 900 to 1,000 hours. Now, mistakes to avoid, and this could help you to just make the process go a lot faster and a lot smoother and effective. Now, the one thing I definitely would recommend, and I think I've already been mentioning it a little bit here and there, is make sure you submit your hours every 900 to 1,000 hours. Why is that important? Well, if you submit over that amount of time and you would like those hours to be logged, then you're going to submit those numbers that are over, and then what happens is you're going to be fined. You're going to have to pay a fee for the amount of hours that you're actually submitting over. And it's not fun. It's a hefty price, And I would definitely recommend to submit on time so you avoid that. And if you have your Excel sheet and you're really keeping track, it should be easy. So you can start to anticipate, okay, look, I'm at 800. Well, my submission's coming up soon, so I should start to get things ready. And I should start perhaps starting to fill out the form or whatever it might be and start migrating all of your hours over. And so it's really important to really keep track of everything so you're on time. And I can say that they're forgiving the first time, because I did submit one time late and I did learn my lesson, and they said, hey, you're submitting late, please submit on time, and I did. Moving forward, I made sure to submit on time. So I believe they'll be forgiving the first time, but I've seen them charge interns for submitting their hours late, and I completely understand, because if they don't put strict deadlines, everyone's going to be submitting hours for a year or 2 years, and then they have to review all of this. And it's a lot to review in one shot. So make sure to submit your hours on time. The other thing that's really important to keep in mind is that there's no backlogging. I know it's not great, but you cannot backlog any hours. So you have to have the status of intern architect in order to log your hours. And so, for example, if you don't have an intern status, you can't log any hours prior to that. So, for example, hours that I did when I was a student or hours that I did prior to becoming an intern, I can't log those. I cannot backlog. I can only log hours from the time that I become an intern architect, or if you are a student, now you can actually log hours, but you need to become a recognized student. So once you gain status of becoming a recognized student, then you can log hours between your time of being in school. So for example, if you're working in the summer or you're taking a gap year between your master's and your undergrad, you can log those hours. But you have to be a recognized student from your jurisdiction in order to log those hours. So make sure to do that prior. So get yourself organized, fill out those forms, fill out the application, make sure you get approved, and then start logging and submitting those hours. The other thing I wish I did was, and I learned this a little bit the hard way, but make sure when you are providing a detailed description of your activities, make sure that they are detailed. Do not just provide a very simple description. Make sure you provide a detailed explanation of what you're doing. What are the details that you're drawing? And the reason why I say this is because one of my submissions that I did for my hours, when it got reviewed, they actually asked me to provide more of a detailed response. And that took so much longer. Like, it took time. It got reviewed and approved, but it took a couple of months, and it takes more effort on your part because now you got to go back and you got to go and write a detailed response about what you did. But if you did that in the first place, you would avoid that. You would save time also on those reviewing your hours as well. So do make sure to really dive into the details of what you're doing exactly as an intern, the activities you're involved, really provide a description of what you're doing. Now, this is a long journey. My internship took around 5 or 6 years to collect all of this experience in these particular categories. So it took some time. And the one thing that could become a challenge is just staying focused. Staying focused on what you want. So you want to become an architect? Well, you have to finish these experience. You got to get these hours in these categories. And just staying focused on where you need to get those hours, staying focused on and keeping track of those hours while keeping a full-time job and having a life can be challenging. So it's important to stay focused on your goal of becoming an architect if that's something that you want, and try to stay focused on those hours and keeping track of those hours and looking back on the hours that you're overdoing on some areas and the ones that you need. And so having that Excel sheet just so that you can see where you're falling short, where you're overdoing it, so that you can get back to your supervising architect and say, hey, I need hours in these categories. And so make sure to keep track of it, because if you're not keeping track, then it's going to be really difficult to get the process done in a effective way. And I would try to as well be patient with the process, because it's not a race. And I think that's something that I thought I could get this done in 3 years. You know, it's going to be tricky to get it done in 3 years. And a lot of times it's because, one, the scale of the projects. 2, your expertise. So if you are more on the early stages of projects, it might be a little bit harder to get those later hours of the project. So for example, project admin is a hard one to get. Getting your site visits and all of those hours might be challenging when you're more on the front end of the project. So try to keep track of them and be in communication with your supervising architect and be patient with that process. It's something that does take time just because of the nature of the projects you're working on and the scale and so on. So just try to be patient, and there's no race to this, but then also don't be too patient. So it's finding a balance between patience, not rushing through it and taking your time, but also not running a race as well. So, but then not going too slow and things are not moving as well. So try to balance things. Now, of course, getting some hours in some categories might be a challenge, and just be aware of that. And just note that that's a challenge that a lot of interns experience, and see how you can actually get those hours. Just try to have a conversation with your supervising architect, talk with your mentor as well. They're there to help you through this process, and you're not alone as well. So just remember to be focused, be patient, but don't be too patient. Try to balance it out, and remember that you have people with you in this journey. Reach out to other interns and reach out to your mentor and your supervising architect with some of the challenges that you're experiencing. And it's only natural to have these challenges. It is a challenging process, and it is a lengthy one too. So just hang in there, because you will get through it. You will finish it. It does end at some point. You will get there. So just keep that in mind. If you survived through this entire video, let me know down in the comments. Add a little orange heart so that I know that you actually watched through this entire video. It's quite a lengthy one, but I wanted to make sure that I actually showed you the whole process and that you have an understanding of it as well. And I hope this was helpful. If it was, make sure to like the video. And of course, if you want to support the channel, make sure to subscribe. And if you want more information about the internship program, I have another video here. I hope to see you on the next video. Until then, bye everyone.